Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We're going to be looking at Trump Media and Technology Group today. You sent this one in, so let's take a look.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of analyst reports, some recent news, and some technical analysis to dig through. So hopefully by the end of this, we can break it down into something that's a little easier to digest.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with some of the basics. Trump Media and Technology Group, DJT, is headquartered in Sarasota, Florida, majority owned by Donald Trump, and operates platforms like Truth Social, TMTG Plus SARD, and TMTG News.
Right, and it went public back in March of 2024 through a merger with Digital World Acquisition, a SPAC.
A SPAC. Now, was that unusual for a company like this to go public through a SPAC?
Well, I mean, SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, they become a bit more popular.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say compared to the traditional initial public offering process, there's definitely a different level of scrutiny involved.
Okay.
And, that can sometimes contribute to some pretty wild price swings early on.
Yeah, definitely wild.
Let's talk about the stock performance, because since going public, it's been quite a ride. Reached a high of $79.38 back in March of 2024. But as of today, it's trading around $20.25. We've seen big jumps, huge drops. Even trading halts have become pretty common with this one.
Yeah, the halts are basically a way for the exchanges to kind of hit pause when things get too crazy. If a stock price moves too fast, too big a percentage in a short amount of time, they'll halt trading just to let everyone catch their breath, maybe look at the news, and hopefully stabilize things a bit.
So is that common with companies that go public through a SPAC or?
Well, I think with DJT, part of it is definitely because it's so closely tied to one person, right? So any news, any sentiment around that person can really move the stock.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that. There was a big drop right after Donald Trump went back into the White House. Some analysts even suggested it might have been linked to a dip in his net worth.
Right, right. It makes sense, If investors see his focus shifting, or maybe could start to where you might need to liquidate some of his shares, that could definitely impact the stock price.
It definitely adds a whole other layer of risk to the equation.
Absolutely. You don't see that kind of risk with most publicly traded companies.
Right. So let's take a look at the company's overall financial health then. In 2024, they reported a net loss of $400.9 million. Revenue came in at $3.6 million. Looking at the first quarter of 2024 alone, net loss of $327.6 million. Total assets are reported at $776.8 million. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, I mean, it definitely raises some questions about how sustainable their current business model is. The big losses are a concern, especially if revenue isn't growing fast enough to make up for it.
Right.
Having a decent amount of assets is good,
Yeah.
but you need to see that revenue climb significantly to offset those losses, or it's not going to be a pretty picture.
So where do you think those expenses are coming from? Are we talking marketing, technology? What's eating up all that cash?
That's a really good question. I mean, without more detail, it's tough to say for sure, but those would definitely be the first places I'd look.
Right. Makes sense. Now let's dive into Truth Social, their main platform. They're facing some stiff competition, going up against some real giants in the social media world. Recently, March 14th, 2025, they announced an update to their Groups feature.
Okay.
And the stock price jumped over 4% the following Friday. What do you think caused that?
Well, it's probably a sign that investors are really keyed into how the platform is doing, how users are responding to it. This update might be seen as a way to pull in more users, get them more engaged. And that's key, right?
Yeah.
More engagement means potential for more revenue down the line.
But the information you shared also said that the long-term effect of this Group's feature update on the stock is still uncertain.
Right. And that's important to remember. One feature, one update doesn't mean they've suddenly cracked the code and can compete with the big players. That's a long game. And it remains to be seen if this update is going to move the needle in the long term.
Gotcha. And we also saw some changes in leadership, with George Holding being appointed to the board. What kind of impact can a move like that have on investor confidence?
It can really go either way. Sometimes a change at the top is seen as a sign that things are going to shake up, maybe
Yeah.
a new direction.
Right.
Investors will be watching closely to see what experience he brings and how he might try to steer the company.
Okay, so let's move to the technical side of things. Current price is sitting around $20.25, 52-week high, $79.38, low of $11.75. So lots of volatility, as we've been talking about. Big drop, trying to recover. Average volume, about 3.44 million shares. But recently it's been down around 2.55. What do you read into that lower volume?
It could mean that there's not a whole lot of conviction out there right now. Maybe investors are waiting for more information, clear signals, before they jump in or out.
Okay. And looking at the moving averages, the 50-day is currently above the 200-day. What does that tell us?
Well, technically, when that happens, it's often seen as a bullish signal. Some people call it a golden cross.
Okay.
But you got to remember, the 200-day is still below the 50-day, which is a longer-term bearish signal. So kind of mixed messages there.
Definitely mixed messages. We didn't have any information about the RSI, though. What does that tell us?
The RSI, the Relative Strength Index.
Right.
Yeah, it's a momentum indicator. It basically gives you an idea of whether a stock might be overbought or oversold. So, helps to spot potential turning points.
Gotcha. Now let's talk investment considerations. The information you sent over highlights a few things. This stock, because of its volatility, might be attractive for short-term traders, people who are comfortable with higher risk.
Right, yeah.
There's also the potential for long-term growth, but that really depends on whether they can grow that user base and start bringing in more revenue.
Now let's not forget the risks. Those consistent losses, the competitive landscape, and then you've got the political and regulatory uncertainties that come with a company like this.
For sure. And what about the technical picture we've been looking at? What's the recommendation there?
Well, based on what we see, I think a cautious approach makes sense. Hold existing positions for now, given the volatility and mixed signals. Consider buying only if we see some real fundamental improvements in the business. If you're risk-averse, selling might be an option.
So one last thing. It's hard to ignore the elephant in the room. How much do you think market sentiment and the political stuff surrounding Donald Trump affects this stock's performance?
I think it's a huge factor. This isn't just your average media and tech company. It's so closely tied to one individual that all the traditional financial stuff can sometimes get overshadowed by the news and the sentiment around him.
Yeah, makes sense. So looking at everything we've talked about, it's clear that Trump Media and Technology Group, DJT, is a pretty complicated story. You've got the initial hype and that crazy high valuation, followed by big drops and consistent losses. The recent app update, the leadership change, they offer a glimmer of hope, but the volatility and the competitive market are big factors to consider.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is one where you really have to think about how much weight you put on those non-financial factors when you're making your investment decisions.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully this breakdown has helped clarify things a bit. If you found this deep dive helpful and you want us to look at other topics, make sure you subscribe, like, and leave a comment.
See you next time.
See you next time.